We've been talking a lot about AI ethics more recently. It's always been a topic of discussion, but as most of us gain access to AI, you find that we are talking about it more frequently and often. Not just about AI itself, but how do we actually implement it into our business? So, our focus today is going to be how to build an AI governance system that you actually can use. So, today I'm going to give you another wonderful breakdown. I want you to go ahead and take your time, review the live, write down some notes. You're welcome to ask me any questions you may have. Whether you happen to think about them now or later, that's fine. You can just post them in the chat. I do take my time to make sure that I read all of my direct messages and also my comments. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it is that you have concerns about. So again, our focus is going to be how to build an AI governance system that you actually can use. So the issue here is that, a lot of companies talk about how they care about ethics. But when you ask them about their governance system, they freeze. They're a little confused, right? Either they don't have it readily available or they haven't developed one. Usually it's that they just don't have one. They have tools, they have AI pilots, they have excitement, they have hype, but they don't actually have a way to manage AI consistently, safely, and strategically. And here's the truth, AI governance isn't a legal problem. It's a leadership problem. It's a business problem. So if you are looking at how you can implement it, you want to consider that AI governance is something that you can't scale if you can't govern. And if you can't scale it, then you can't compete. So today I am going to show you exactly how to build an AI governance system that you can actually use without slowing down your business. That's been an ongoing conversation as well, right? How do we implement AI ethics without slowing everything down, without putting everything to a halt? Because we talked about that as well in different parts of your business. Do we stop? Do we implement now? Should we have already implemented? And if you're asking those questions, then we definitely want to make sure that we take time to thoroughly implement a governance plan. So let's talk about what the numbers show. And here's a brutal statistic because in the first half of 2025, 42% abandoned most of their AI initiatives, and that's up from 17% just the year before. So that's more than doubled in just 1 year. And why? There are three main reasons I want to focus on. There's AI governance that has collapsed. And before we get there, I want us to understand this. These companies, they didn't fail because AI doesn't work. They failed because they had no system to govern it. No structure equals abandonment, right? So here are the three reasons why we want to focus on what is actually happening. It's too complicated. You created a 40-page policy. No one reads it. No one follows it. They don't truly understand what it even means, right? They're still trying to understand how can we implement this and at what stage. The other issue is that it's too vague. You use AI responsibly. Well, that is subjective. So you need to really break down what using AI responsibly means. Review outcomes periodically. What's periodically? Is that every 2 weeks? Is that every quarter? Is that once a year? And what does this even mean? So there's a lot of in between the lines that we need to establish in governance. And I think the reason why you come across it being so vague is because leadership doesn't actually know where to start. So you want to consider also not operational. There's no workflow to refer to. There's not a standard operating procedure. There's no ownership. Who do you actually talk to when something goes wrong with AI governance? There's no monitoring, there's no cadence. So what do you do from that, right? So it's just too complicated. 40-page policy, no one reads it, no one follows it. It's too vague. Use AI responsibly. You want to review outcomes and really discuss what this even means. So governance is not a document. The governance is the operating system for your AI. Your business already has an operating system for finance, right? You've already established what that was. For HR, for sales, you know exactly what your numbers look like in sales. Who are you reaching out to? What are your projected sales? What does KPI look like? You have it for marketing, right? What does your avatar look like? But you don't have it for AI. Right? And so that gap creates this risk of inconsistency and eventually brand damage. So today we're going to close that gap because we're going to really dig in and discuss more what that means. Because effective governance, it isn't about creating the perfect policy. So your business runs on systems already. Your finance teams, they follow a system. Your sales team, they already have a process. And your marketing operations, they are already standardized, right? But AI is the one thing that's flying without a system. So this is where the risk lives, and this is where the chaos also happens. So we really want to also dig into your systems, right? The core system that every business needs. And we want to look at your AI inventory map, your AI decision flow, and then human in the loop framework. So that's an ongoing issue as well. The concern is that you're going to be replaced or you just really don't understand where the framework is implemented. And so I want to kind of give clarity to this particular area because this is the core system that every business needs. It's four parts that actually work together. So part one is going to be, what do we use AI for, right? Where is it deployed? What data does it touch? What decisions does it influence? So one list updated monthly. This is not a theory. This is essential. So you can't govern what you don't know that exists. And then the other part is going to be the decision AI flow. This should be a question that you would ask. Should we deploy it? And here are this is your workflow and your 3 steps. So you have purpose, you have impact, and then you also have your risk, right? So this is how you determine what is going to work best for you. So essentially what you're doing is you're assigning different colors so that you know green means it's great, you can deploy it. Yellow, it's minor review. Red means there needs to be a leadership decision, okay? And then part 3, that's the human in the loop framework. So this is your safety net. You get to define, like, where does a human review come into place? Is it the AI output? Is it before you actually put information in? At what stage? And also, who approves high impact decisions? Like, what is automated versus overseen? So every stage uses this, from small businesses to enterprises. This is not just about slowing down. This is about being intentional, right? And also, you want to have a monitoring and escalation plan. So what metrics show AI is behaving as expected? What triggers an escalation? Who handles it? What's the response timeline? Because that is what prevents the 3 a.m. disasters we talked about. That is what separates companies that move fast from companies that crash really hard. So again, this isn't theory, but these are guardrails that let you move fast without breaking trust. And I also want to make sure I note that you want it to be simple, clear, and also actionable. This governance that actually works, it's designed for execution and not only just for documentation. So yes, you're documenting and you're keeping track of where you are within the process, but you're also making it actionable, right? So for scale ups, this is where everything really gets messy because you have multiple teams, you have engineering, product, marketing, sales, and then there is no alignment. And then you also lost visibility along the way. So this is where governance either it scales or it breaks down entirely. So the organizations that actually navigate this transition successfully, they don't just add bureaucracy, they add a standard. They create lightweight frameworks. They enable an automatic process decision making. So this allows for you to remain consistent across all teams. So the solution isn't necessarily more control. It's really better coordination through shared frameworks and also just regular alignment. So this means continuing to look at what this process really looks like. And I want to make sure that I didn't leave anything out as we're covering what scale ups look like and in terms of getting really messy, right? So for scale ups, you want to make sure that you focus on a one-page checklist. And this is shared across teams. And then you also have a standard human in the loop expectation. This is the cross-department AI map. And then you would monthly have an AI sync, and that is the real magic. So if you want to think about like what a sprint looks like in a meeting, it's 20 minutes, it's to the point, you're covering the most crucial parts of where AI is within your scale up. So a one-page governance checklist, and this is shared across teams. And then you have a standard human in the loop expectation. That means that we all review it the same way. There's one standard. There's not one person who says, oh, I do it this way because it just works better for me. Or I do it this way because we have to do an extra step over here in our department. So you want to make sure that you're looking at all of the areas within the business and you incorporate that within the checklist. So there is not that need for someone to feel like they have to do something different because it's either incomplete or it's inconsistent. So the checklist, it equals consistency, and the monthly sync-in, that equals alignment. So both equals fast, but still very safe. So I want to focus on the monthly AI sync. And this is where each team gets to share what they deployed this month, what's working, what's not working, what concerns that they see. So any escalations that may be needed. And the monthly AI sync, that means it usually lasts anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes, and each team shares what they deployed, right? And any escalations as needed. So this keeps everyone really high on innovation, but making sure that you actually keep your risk very low. This is where consistency emerges, right? Without getting caught up in all of the regulations within your company and all the steps that you have to go through. So everyone actually knows what's happening. There's no need for a bottleneck. There's no reason to slow anything down. Everyone is all on the same page, right? So let's talk about the green light and how to deploy immediately. So the AI tool that we're focusing on, we're thinking about, fast path to production and a clear criteria. That means that the team knows the answers immediately. There's no waiting. There's no confusion. They're ready to just deploy. And the only way that really happens is that you already have a clear line of sight. It means that you already understand like what user customer data looks like, what's reversible within your system. How does your system work? There are certain things that once things are checked off in the system, you can't undo or override, or it requires an additional technical step behind it. So having these answers up front is going to really help the scale up run a little bit smoother. And then there's also less confusion. So this is really a use case where it meets all the criteria for immediate deployment. And then the AI personalizes subject line based on customer name, previous engagement, but the risk profile is extremely low. So that's something that you want to consider. So if the AI generates an awkward subject line, the worst outcome is a customer just doesn't open the email. Right? It's not that there's no access denied, there's not a financial impact. You may have maybe a frustrated customer, but it's not a huge impact. And so this is exactly what governance framework really should enable. Is a fast path to production for low risk use case, and then also a clear evaluation criteria. So let's look at red light, a scale up for red light example. So what we want to focus on is that there's the safety mechanism, right? It catches risky decisions. And then there's a brief review with leadership. Then you can add the human check. Then proceed. This is how you prevent the lawsuits and customer complaints. And you already have answers to these questions in terms of how you're going to use personal data. Also, is it reversible? How does it affect employment access? So here's a good example. This AI makes irreversible decisions that affect people's livelihoods and exposes the organization to significant legal and reputational risk if the system exhibits bias. So the solution isn't to block deployment, it really is to add appropriate safeguards, making sure there are additional steps within that checking mechanism, even if it's an automated system. There's always the what if. If the person checks this and gives this part of their social, or if they have a credit score on this, there's the what if. So you want to make sure that you slow down and actually build in these modifications. And then the team can deploy it like within 1 to 2 weeks instead of the same day. The reason why we say 1 to 2 weeks, because you need time to really look at how you're going to deploy this safety mechanism. And this allows for you to have a brief review and a thoughtful implementation. It's not a rushed process, especially when we're looking at something that falls within a red light and needs an additional review. So we want to make sure that we're making the appropriate modifications before we enable the teams to move forward. So for enterprises, I want to focus on a tiered governance. So here's how we want to consider this. This really ties directly into the ethical AI framework that we covered live. And you need the 3 governance lanes because there is no one size fits all. That's the main thing that you have to understand. Governance intensity, it has to match the risk. So if there's a major risk, there needs to be additional oversight. There needs to be an additional human loop in. And this is how enterprises are able to move fast. They're able to move fast on the front end because they've already taken time to build the back end, right? So they already have covered what low risk looks like. They covered the recommendations for what is needed. They looked at the teams and they have already self-certified. Each team member is saying, okay, this is acceptable. This is what happens in this particular situation. And then they also have a monthly audit where they review and they assess the information in great detail. And then there's tier 2, where you have moderate risk. That means that the customer outcomes, they are affected, and you must tie in a human in the loop. There is also department approval and legal check and a quarterly audit. And then you have your tier 3, which is high risk. That means there are critical decisions being made, and it requires C-level approval. and also legal plus compliance plus bias testing as well. So there should be an audit trail and real-time monitoring. That means that you're using a system that allows for you to review the audits. It shows who's actually checked what off, who's reviewed it, who's given a final approval or different stage of approval, tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. This helps for you to keep track of what actually is going on. So the key that I really want to focus on here for enterprises and the tiered governance risk is that it enables enterprises to move at a startup speed, but on low risk, because you've already put the work on the back end. And this is how large organizations deploy hundreds of AI use cases without drowning in the approval process or even exposing themselves to catastrophic failures. So let's look in a little bit further on the tier 1 low risk AI lead prioritization. So I want to focus here. So AI suggests high value leads. Let's consider you're using a tool, a marketing tool, right? So there's the decision, there's the recommendation only. Then there's the human, which is a salesperson who decides what happens. Then there's the process, where there is a self-certified. That means that individual already has clarification on what the checklist is, what the process is, what the requirements are. There is not this guesswork that they have to decide individually what they should do, right? Because there's already a use case, there's already a checklist, there's already conversations and audits that exist. So they already know what the protocol should be. And then there's a monthly audit. So the speed is you're able to deploy immediately, right? So tools that recommend but don't make the final decisions, that's going to be important. So if an AI suggests which leads to prioritize, or a salesperson still decides who to call, this is going to be important, because that means that the AI is not making the final decision. And this is where you get a chance to review it, make the assessment, and make sure that you have the correct overhead as necessary. So minimal overhead, maximum speed, but still managed by a person. So now I want to focus on tier 2. And here's a really great example. We're going to talk a little bit more about moderate risk and the customer churn prediction. So the focus here is that we are looking at tools that identifies customers' risk at churn, right? Using an AI tool. We're looking at the decisions, the flags for intervention, the human customer service team that decides which action to take, then the process department approval, legal check, quarterly audit. So the speed here could be to deploy within 1 to 2 weeks. So tools that affect customer outcomes, but include human review. A great example is AI flags high churn for customers. And then your customer service team, it decides what the intervention process should be. So what that might look like is a department head approval, it going through legal and data team checks, quarterly audits, and ongoing monitoring. So more rigor is really required, but it's in proportion to the type of risk that we're seeing here on this particular tier. So this still moves faster than an ad hoc, but allows for you to actually incorporate these extra steps just to make sure that we're not missing anything. So the tier 2, it strikes the balance between speed and rigor and more process than tier 1, because the stakes are higher. So it's important to have this additional review. But it still is streamlined enough to deploy in weeks rather than months. So the added oversight is in proportion, again, to the risk, and its appropriate safeguards without unnecessary bureaucracy. So that's the important thing to note. We're not adding additional weight where it's not needed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about our next tier, which is tier 3. And I think this is an important tier because we've been hearing a lot about this in the news lately as well. And a lot of this stems from AI implementation that does not have the correct oversight. It doesn't have the correct back-end checklists already built in. And those are the what if tiers that we talked about, or if it automatically reaches a specific bracket, whether it is a credit score or it's an age or if it's an ethnicity, are we pushing it over to a certain person, and are we extracting those specific biases that could cause harm in terms of what the final decision making would actually look like? So this analyzes an applicant financial data, credit history, and various risk factors as well, used to recommend loan approval or denial. This is a tier 3, and it falls into a tier 3 because it influences critical life decisions with significant financial, legal, and reputational implications. So there is going to be an executive sponsor that is assigned. This is a C-level sponsor who identifies who actually owns the deployment decision and who is accountable for the outcomes. And then there's a legal and compliance review. Legal reviews data sources for bias risk, also compliance to ensure that regulatory alignment and to document the review process. We always had a saying that if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. And so it's important to already have that built into the process. And also bias testing is number 3. That's a third-party bias audit test for discrimination across protected characteristics. This is race, gender, age, et cetera, things that fall within that particular category. And then there's the audit trail implementation. So build systems to log every AI recommendation, and also human decisions for regulatory and compliance and appeals as well. And then there's the real-time monitoring. You want to deploy dashboard tracking approval rates across demographics. This will give you a bird's eye view to flag any concerns or patterns immediately. This lets you know exactly where you may have an issue and what to address right away. And then you want to deploy with oversight. You want to launch after completing full governance review, and you want to monitor continuously. This is not something that you set and you forget. This is something that you have to continuously and rigorously, with rigor, to review and continue to process as necessary and appropriate, especially for high-stake decisions. So the Air Canada chatbot case, it illustrates like what happens when governance fails at this level. And then also the company was legally required to honor incorrect information. Its AI provided to customers, resulting in the financial penalties and brand damage. So tier 3 governance, it really prevents these scenarios through comprehensive review before deployment and also continuous monitoring afterwards. So yes, it takes a little bit longer than tier 1 and tier 2, but that is by design because based on the risk, it's absolutely necessary. You need to have that additional oversight, right? So some decisions are just too important to rush through. Rigorous, but necessary, and this is where you prevent lawsuits and also brand damage. So I want to move into another critical area, and this is the part that a lot of people don't focus enough on, and that's the change management, right? The critical piece, and that's because your teams really, they need additional training, and that's the part that doesn't often get addressed. They need to be able to understand why it matters. They need to be champions in each department. And you can't just publish a policy and expect compliance. So this is where most governance really fails. And it's not because the system isn't any good, but it's because adoption is really hard. And we talked about this recently. You need the leadership sponsorship. And so you want to focus on what's working in terms of how you train your teams, explaining why it matters, and also identifying champions in each department who can advocate for governance. And then so celebrating compliance publicly when teams follow the process successfully. What you're doing is you're building a process and an understanding on what is to happen with change management, what is to happen with AI when specific areas are being followed or even when they're not. So I think one critical piece with change management is governance only works if the people follow it. Your teams need training. They need to understand why this matters. They need champions in each department. So you can't just publish a policy and then expect a compliance. You know, a lot has changed from how we do business now to how we used to do business before. It's more of a, I said it, I expect for you to do it, follow it. People want to have a better understanding, especially as it relates to AI. And how does it interact with business? What are the complications? What are the possible issues that could come up? So answering these questions not only help you as leadership, but it also helps the team, the business as a whole. So these are areas that you really do want to focus on. So I think that it's also important to note that change management isn't optional. I think that a lot of people just don't spend enough time on change management as a whole and what that means. And it really is the difference between governance that exists and theory and governance that works in practice. You have to have it actively in practice, and you have to be able to update it and revise it, especially as things change so quickly with AI and within the industry as well. We've seen a lot of changes, a lot of laws change that didn't apply before. So you have to make sure you have this layered approach so that you're keeping your business safe. So let's talk about AI governance, the competitive advantage. So we talk about faster deployments. Everyone is really hung up on how quickly can we get this out, right? And I think you need to make sure that there's a clear green light criteria that eliminates ambiguity. And teams know immediately whether they can deploy or if they need a review. And there's no waiting for permission on low risk initiatives. And this is where change management and training really comes into play. This is where your standard operating procedure happens. This is where your known periodic reviews should occur, whether it's weekly or quarterly, because it will result in fewer failures. And the issues that are caught early gives you a chance to get ahead of things. So it doesn't become a public issue. So a better decision is making frameworks prevent deployment of poorly thought through AI. If you can catch that up front, you are way ahead of the game. So this is not only about being cautious, this is about being smart. This is about making sure you have everything in alignment so that it matches with whatever the laws are, with your internal processes, your internal AI ethical standards, and your AI governance templates as well. That also connects to higher trust. You know, customers trust companies that govern AI responsibly. I know people who say, hey, I'm never going to work with this particular company again. I really don't like the way that they manage a particular AI, you know, tool, a rollout, enhancement. And you just have to think that as a business, you want to make sure that you govern AI responsibly, and teams trust leaders that provide clear frameworks. And also investors trust organizations with a mature risk management. I think some of the things that we also need to clear up and understand that just because you haven't worked with AI for a long time or ever doesn't mean that you can already have a mature risk management assessment. That means that you're going in before you actually deploy AI, and you're making sure that you're looking at all the different aspects of your business. This is going to be relevant regardless of whether you're a small business, a scale up, an enterprise, a founder. These are things that are going to be important, and this allows for you to gather this very mature matrix on what's needed in terms of what your risk management is going to look like with AI. And then that also leads directly into reduced liability. Reduced liability. Because you can explain every AI decision with documentation. So if you know exactly what's happening when you deploy AI, what happens on the back end, the front end, the user experience, every aspect of it. This allows for you to create audit trails and for you to stay focused on what is happening. So regulatory compliance becomes manageable because now you're documenting along the way. You're not waiting until, oh, there's an audit coming up and now I'm looking back at 90 days or almost a year's worth of changes, which makes it very difficult to make an assessment as to also whether or not AI is truly working for you, but also what are the implications? What are the pitfalls with AI? What are the ethical concerns or issues that might be coming up? And so if you're not staying on top of that, that would expose you legally and also could give you some additional issues that you don't want to have to worry about. So that also leads next into better alignment. Everyone knows the rules and the standards. Teams can coordinate effectively and conflicting implementation across different departments. So this is the ROI governance. It's not compliance theater. You've heard me say that before, but it's really about real business impact. And organizations with mature AI governance, they move faster. And if you're able to move faster, with having the right systems in place, then you can make better assessments. You are collecting your data. You know exactly what's happening, when it's happening, what to expect, right? So I think the important parts, we covered a lot of information today in terms of how you make your assessments, what your tier levels are for enterprises, what your scale up levels are. And you want to make sure that you continue to focus on the full system, right? And how you apply your AI governance and making sure that you're not working only in theory, but you're working with systems that are tested and refined and ready to implement, which is exactly what we do on our end. We're making sure that it is as it should be. And the way to do that is to take a forensic AI assessment to make sure that you are positioned well and that you're not going to have any issues moving forward. So different starting point for each stage, but they all lead to the same outcome, and that is sustainable governance. So you pick what applies to you and making sure that you are being rigorous in your process and you're staying focused in terms of what needs to happen. And you're not part of that 42% of who actually failed, right? So the governance is that is what separates the winners in the AI initiatives. And this is what happens without governance, not because AI, again, doesn't work, but it's because it's unsustainable. If you're not documented accurately, you don't know what AI is supposed to truly do for your industry or your business. So these are areas that are super critical that you really need to focus on. And then this allows for you to have the faster deployments, the fewer failures because you're catching them early, and then the higher trust from customers and teams. And then you get cleaner data. Cleaner data means that you can make better decisions, right? Because you've audited, you've tracked the information, you're able to reduce liability, and you can explain your decisions. If you can't explain what's happening, it means that you don't know well enough what AI is doing within your teams, within your system, within your business. And so this gives you a stronger assessment because now you have the confidence because you have the information. So better cross-team alignment, everyone knows what the rules are, right? So the ROI of governance, not compliance theater, but real business impact. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to make sure I take a review. If you liked any of the information that you heard today, make sure that you also take note and let me know if there are any areas that you'd like to hear more about on this topic on how to build an AI governance system that you actually can use. All right, until next time, this is Simone signing off with Apelli. Take care.